Okay, this is John DeRosa here for MHS TV, and I'm here with a very special person, Mr. Bud Schafer. He's a Pearl Harbor survivor. He's been a strong supporter of MHS, Board of Directors on Manasquan Savings and Loan, a graduate of MHS. And Mr. Schafer, we're glad to have you here. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more of your background. I know you were a graduate of Annapolis.
Yeah, I was a graduate of Annapolis, and I played on the football squad, not the first team down there. And I graduated in June of 1940, which probably makes all this ancient history to you folks.
And how about, what was the time span in between when you graduated Annapolis to the time that you ended up in service?
Oh, it was immediate.
It was immediate.
I was ordered immediately to the Arizona at Pearl Harbor, and we were the first class, graduating class, that did not get any leave. The whole political situation was getting very tense.
Mm-hmm. And how old are you when you were sent over?
24 years old.
24,
right.
Now, as students now, a lot of times, you know, we won't get as much of the background of Pearl Harbor and the events leading up to it in school as there actually were. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like upon your arrival there? You know, how did you feel about it? What was it like?
Well, at that time, the world was in chaos. The Germans had run through France in about a couple of weeks, and London was being bombed to its death. And Japan was running around Asia, and the whole world just seemed to be disintegrating. Mm-hmm. And we knew that it was just a matter of time before we got into war. We just didn't know when.
Mm-hmm. Now, what were you served on the Arizona?
I served on the Arizona, yes.
Now, what were some of your duties and your jobs?
Well, I was the 4th Division officer, and our division had a turret. We had a motor launch we were responsible for, and we also had a catapult. I was a catapult officer, and we would shoot off the scouting planes.
Now, from the time that you were there, how long in between until Pearl Harbor was actually bombed?
A year and a half.
A year and a half.
Yes. I was stationed at Hawaii for two solid years. It was a year and a half before the war and a half year afterwards.
Did you see things? You know, the pace of the war accelerating? Was there a build-up to it? Maybe you could tell me a little bit about how things changed, if there was like signs that you knew.
Well, certainly, there sure was signs. I told you what we were responsible for, but my watches were on the bridge as off the deck. And close to Pearl Harbor, every time I came on the bridge at mid-watch, which is midnight to 4, and the captain's night order book would say, read, unidentified submarines in our operating area, keep in a special lookout. And those were the days that we earned our money, which was $145 a month, incidentally.
Wow. And so how long, like you said, the special submarine watches, and how long before Pearl Harbor was that?
Well, I would say a month.
Yeah.
A month before.
Now, in between that, there was, I guess, like a full year, at least a full year since you got there, and then what was that first year like for you being there? Was it like very chaotic? I know you said that you told me before that you coached a football team on the Arizona, and I mean, what was that like? Was it as chaotic as?
No. It was Hawaii was a very, very nice climate, and it was rather nice duty, and I enjoyed it. In fact, I got to tell you about a football game I went to on Thanksgiving. The two local schools, one was a prep and the other was the high school, Punahou and Kamehameha. And in the half, the cheerleaders did a hula. And I said, that's for me.
So basically,
it was good duty. It was good duty.
Yeah, and there were some good times, I guess.
Oh yeah, sure. Waikiki Beach, we were there a lot.
Yeah.
Good swimming.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of those memories a little bit later. But you know, as we're going, so you left off about, you know, like a month before Pearl Harbor was actually bombed, and you said that, you know, there was unidentified submarines off the coast, and you know, was there I mean, did anybody really realize what was about to happen?
Well, we knew there were submarines in our area, but one of the things that people don't really appreciate is one of the duties of a submarine is to scout. And we assumed that they were scouting us. We didn't know that, well, they were scouting us and passing back information as to our movements and so forth. And the whole world was getting very tense right at that time, if you can imagine. Everybody was in a fight of some nature.
Now, let's bring it up to, let's say, a week or so.
All right.
Before, and maybe get a little bit more, you know, specify. Well, you know.
Sure. Well, about a week before Pearl Harbor, we went out on maneuvers on the west of Hawaii, and that is when we got these submarine warnings. And I'll never forget when we started to come in the harbor on a Friday. The destroyers reported more submarines, and our admiral, who was on the ship, sent out the message to death bomb them. And I said, my God, this is war. And when we went through the torpedo nets into Pearl Harbor, and I thought, thank God, this cruise is over. And I thought, well, at last we're safe. And I didn't know, I had no idea that in less than 2 days the ship would be sunk.
No, around this time, maybe you'd like to, what was going on around, like outside that area? What was going around in Europe? Was that you know, around that time, what was going on?
France was knocked out, and poor England was just being bombed to pieces, and we didn't think they would last. I mean, and it was just terrible times, and it was just unbelievable times. France was supposed to have one of the biggest armies, bigger army than Germany, and Germany just went through them as fast as they could, as their blitzkrieg would go. It was unbelievable.
So I get the feeling that when you said you got back to Pearl Harbor, you said you kind of felt safe. You felt,
yes,
my God,
right.
That's, you know, I'm back home.
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of added to the shock of it all. I mean, that since it was American territory, and being back there, and then a few days later.
Well, that's right. What a lot of people don't realize is that the Army, it was responsible for our safety, for the safety of the fleet and the island. And that's one reason why I guess we kind of relaxed.
Yeah. You kind of felt that everything was going to be okay because it was in
well, yeah, sure. We thought we were protected. We were in the harbor. It was all over.
So let's talk a little bit about the day of Pearl Harbor, and the event. You know, how did the day go? What happened? Was it what time of the day did it happen? And
well, let me go back a little before that.
Okay.
We knew things were getting tough, and here comes Saturday night, and I went to one of my friends and said, "What, you going ashore?" And he said, "No, I'm going to save my money for a Christmas present." So I went to another classmate, and I said, "Are you going ashore?" And he was very upset. He wasn't going ashore because he was assistant to the navigator, and the navigator wanted him to bring up the charts, to correct the charts for Singapore. And he says, "I think we're going to Singapore." That's the scuttlebutt. There was rumors all over the ship for everything.
Oh, wow.
And then, so I said to him, I said, well, I'm going ashore. I don't have anything special, but it might be the last time in a long while.
Mm-hmm.
So after a few night spots, I met another friend, and he said, I've got a room at the Moana, stay with me at the Moana Hotel in Waikiki Beach. So I said, sure. Well, 8 o'clock that morning, we heard the shooting. And I said, my God, things must be tough if the Army's practicing on Sunday morning. And so I called up the desk, and I said, what's going on? And they said, well, we don't know, but if you're in the service, you're supposed to get back to your post. So I had a girlfriend out there, and I was supposed to go out with her that afternoon, and I called down the desk and said, I'd like this phone number. And they said, oh, you can't call unless it's an emergency. And I said, well, it's an emergency to me. So I got her on the phone, and all I got is, my God, Bud, are you alive? And she hung up. And I later found out that one of our 5-inch shells landed right in her block and blew in all the windows. And so then I went, I fortunately had a wreck of a car, and I rode back to Pearl Harbor, which is about 15 miles from Waikiki Beach. And I got down to the dock, and I said, what's burning around the Arizona? And he said, she's been sunk about 10 minutes ago. I said, oh, my God, I couldn't believe it. Here I am in civilian clothes. And thank God my own motor launch came alongside, and we got, I don't know why, but we just went for the Arizona. We got in the middle, there was the last wave of Jap planes. And throughout the war, I was never scared about getting hit by the Japs, but I've been petrified about getting hit by our own bullets, our own shrapnel, because at that point they were all shooting up at the airplanes, and here we are in an open motor launch, and all the shrapnel's coming down. So then nobody saw more of the death and destruction of Pearl Harbor than I did, because that whole day in my motor launch, we went around, picked up people dead and alive, and did whatever we could. And that night I went to the Tennessee, and it was tied up in front of the Arizona, and our propellers were turning over at the equivalent of 13 knots to keep the burning oil from the Arizona away from us. And it never entered our mind that the Japs were not coming back. I mean, here the fleet was knocked out, the planes were knocked out, and that was their biggest mistake, that they didn't come back, because we were caught very badly.
Now, was there a strategical reason that they didn't come back, or was it like a folly?
It wasn't their plans, and I don't know what it was sort of brilliant. The attack and everything was brilliant, very well executed, and but they didn't plan to. They didn't have the troops to conquer the island, and it was stupid. It was brilliant and it was stupid. Here they had the island just the way they wanted it, but they didn't have the backup to take it. Mm-hmm. And we mustered the Marines on the Marine force on the Tennessee to repel the boarders coming ashore, and of course rumors were all over. They were at this place or that place or that place. The Japs, we had them all over. But fortunately, they didn't come back. And it's just like what the mistake they made. If you're out hunting for bear and you see a bear sleeping, you either shoot him, but you don't kick him in the rear end. And that's what made everybody upset. And the country really came together, and really that's what won the war. Everybody was for it. Everybody, the sailors and the Marines and the Army, everybody supported the war. And,
so basically Pearl Harbor, although, I mean...
Consolidated opinion.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there Japanese losses?
Very few. Maybe, I don't think there were over 10.
Really?
In an airplane. See, they were in their airplanes, and I don't think they lost over 10 people.
And what were the American losses, do you...
Well, there were over 1,000 killed right on the Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, I think, around 3,000 throughout on the island.
Yeah. I really think one of the things that we don't touch upon in American history as much in school is the what ifs. What if Japan did have a follow-up attack? What do you think would have happened?
Well, if they put a few more bombs, or if they put a couple bombs in the powerhouse there, or if they put a couple of torpedoes in the caissons, that's the gates for the dry docks. Mm-hmm. It would have delayed things for at least another year or so. And of course there were oil tanks that looked like, when you're on the Parkway going by Bayonne and all those tanks there, we had a lot of tanks, big oil tanks around Pearl Harbor, and they should have bombed them, because if they set one afire, they probably might have all gone. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know this is a bit hard to explain, but was your feeling more of a feeling of like anger, or was it more of sadness? I mean, there was heavy losses on the American side, but at the same time, there was probably like a really deep feeling of anger. How would you best describe, your feelings?
Well, I was very upset and annoyed at the least, and frankly, I didn't even think I'd ever get through the war, and I figured, well, I'd just do the best I could until I got it, because it was really, my world had come to an end on that December the 7th, I'll tell you that. And I just figured I'd go on till I got it.
I guess when you saw that the United States was kind of uniting and backing the war, did that give you kind of like a new sense of hope and patriotism?
It made us, It made us feel much better. But of course, we were way out there, and everything was back home. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until the later days of the war, maybe a year before it ended, that we saw what America can do. Here on December the 7th, our fleet practically was at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, and in less than 3 years, out in the Pacific, there were carriers, and there were destroyers, and there were cruisers, and there was even a floating dry dock, and there were tugs to take the crippled ships away. What America did America can do anything it wants to. It just has to want to. It was unbelievable what they did, because we were just recovering from the world's depression, and the fleet wasn't right up to snuff, I'll tell you that, on December the 7th. And because, for instance, they didn't have enough money for fuel. They just swung around the hook in Long Beach, California for 4 or 5 months.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's something that we don't tend to think about the Depression. And
that's one reason the Navy financially wasn't prepared for Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. But then good old Roosevelt just poured the money in, and we took off.
You say, that was one of the reasons the Navy wasn't prepared. Could you actually, would there be any way to be prepared? Was there?
Well,
was that the kind of thing?
Radar was just in its infancy. I'd never even seen a radar at that time, and didn't even know what it was. But as you know, the radar picked up, the Army radar picked up the flight of planes. And we all thought, or not we, the opinion was that it was our planes coming in from the West Coast. Mm-hmm. In those days, the only thing the radar could do was say there were planes out there, but they couldn't tell you whether they were ours or theirs. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of controversy about that, but it gives people a lot to talk about.
Yeah. You mentioned before, like, a lot about how the United opinion was, back home, yeah, and so far away from where you were. What were the lines of communication like? But was there communication between you and your family back home? Well,
naturally there was letters and so forth, but everything was censored, and quite a little of it came out in the papers and so forth, and pictures. And about 6 weeks later, they came out and showed some of the destruction at Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. That, of course, was the only communications.
Would you say that that the American people had as good an idea of what was going on as you did out there?
Yes. Yeah, they had a very good general idea, and that's all they needed. I mean, they didn't have a specific idea. Right. But yes, they had a very good idea. The papers and the magazines and so forth, yes. Yes.
So basically, after Pearl Harbor, immediately after Pearl mm-hmm. Harbor, in the days that followed, how did life change?
Well, for myself, in the center of Pearl Harbor is Ford Island, which is an airfield, and they sent me on the staff there, and our admiral had in charge of all the planes in the Pacific, and that was very good duty for 6 months. And then I was ordered back to the Alabama, which was being built in Norfolk Navy Yard, and I reported back to her, and then from there on, I guess it was around 5 or 6 months on that, and then we went to the North Atlantic and then the South Pacific.
Mm-hmm. And I guess how long after Pearl Harbor was that?
I got detached from Ford Island in June, and I went to the Alabama, and then that December we shook down, and then we went to Scotland and operated with the British fleet. And then that summer, we went through the canal and went out to the South Pacific and operated with Halsey's fleet.
Now, what was going on politically, I guess, like right after Pearl Harbor? What was our nation doing, and what were other nations doing?
Well, we were trying to recover from the shock, and I will say we did a good job. And of course, England was trying to save herself from being bombed out of existence by the Germans. And as I said before, France had already fallen, and the world looked very dismal, I'll tell you that.
Mm-hmm. At this point, did America I guess it was President Roosevelt at the time.
Yes. Incidentally, I marched in his inauguration down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did he immediately, what was his strategy for America right after Pearl Harbor?
Well, as you know, that he called it the Day of Infamy. And, well, the strategy, unfortunately, was that Europe came first, and we came on the tail end of the stick, and which was very upsetting to the Navy. But the priority was to beat Germany down, and then they would send everything over to the Pacific. That was the general strategy.
Mm-hmm. At this point of Pearl Harbor, how far had Germany advanced?
Oh, France had fallen within 2 or 3 weeks before I graduated.
Really?
And England was being, or London was being bombed every night, practically out of existence.
So I'd like to actually touch upon, I mean, you were not much older than myself. I'm about 18, and you were, I guess, 24. At the time of Pearl Harbor and immediately before and after. And, you know, to think of someone like myself being there, or a student, being so much to deal with, like, emotionally, not to mention physically, but it's an experience that I think we as teenagers don't get in textbooks, and therefore find it like very hard to comprehend and get the full picture. We learn a lot of facts and dates,
yeah,
but I think a lot of the times we don't understand what, you know,
the emotions.
Exactly. And maybe you could, I mean, tell us a little bit about what you were feeling.
Well, needless to say, I was in a state of shock. I don't know that I've ever recovered from it,
yeah.
But it was unbelievable. I lost 1,000 shipmates on the Arizona all at once. If I'd lost 1 or 2, I think it would have hit me worse, because you can't fathom the tremendous loss.
Mm.
I mean, it's just beyond comprehension. Your mind can't conceive of it.
And you were, I mean, you were a young kid, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And I guess you were away from home when you were at Annapolis.
Yeah, sure.
And things. So, I mean, did that at least prepare you for being away from everything, for being so far away?
Well, when you say so far away, if you're away, you're away. I don't think the distance makes much difference. But the reason I went, one of the reasons I went to Annapolis was that I enjoyed getting around. I wanted to see the world,
mm-hmm.
and I sure did. Sometimes I didn't like what I saw, but no, all in all, I was quite happy and quite content with what I do. And there was always something new. And I tell you, the Navy keeps you. You don't get tired of it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the Navy. Having a turret with maybe 100 men in it, it was like coaching a football team. I mean, it was very, 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 very enjoyable. And we had quite a responsibility, as I told you. Here I'm 24 years old, and officer of the deck, and captain's asleep in these quarters back there in the cabin, and here you are keeping a ship in formation, and all the ships are darkened, no lights, and before the days of radar. The only way you could tell how you were doing is with your binoculars and see how big the ship got in those binoculars. And that's the only way. We had no scientific way of keeping it, but boy, we did it. And I tell you, that's something for a 24-year-old kid.
Yeah, really. And I think that's important.
Yeah.
Is there any, do you have any, I don't know, particularly fond memories or stories, people you met and kept in touch with, or places you went to?
Well, as midshipmen, we had a couple nice cruises to England and Madeira Islands and Germany. That was, we were in Germany when Hitler was really at his prime, and we would go down the streets and say, or salute the stormtroopers, and they say, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. And we had some very good times. Then we went to England. Our senior year, we were supposed to go to Finland, Paris, and Italy. And the last minute, they canceled it. That's the year the war broke out. And they canceled that, and we went right off Manasquan here, made circles and went up to Halifax and Nova Scotia and up to St. Lawrence to Quebec. That was our cruise to Europe.
So, I mean, I guess you achieved seeing the world by being in the Navy. I mean...
Well, yeah, well, we saw, in the South Pacific, we saw a lot of the world we didn't want to see. I mean, there was nothing but atolls. I went a year and a half without seeing anything other than atolls, or shall we say civilization.
Oh, go ahead.
We never stopped the propellers that whole time. That was another thing that beat the Japs. They didn't, it was unbelievable how they supplied us. There would be 4 supply ships in a line, and we would pull alongside of each one, and one would have ammunition, the next would have refrigeration stores, and the next would have well, food and just ammunition and what we needed. And on one of those ships would be our mail, which to me was unbelievable.
Well, on behalf of Manasquan High School, I'd like to say thank you for coming and informing us about your experiences, and I really had a good time, and I hope everybody learned a lot. It was very interesting.
My heart is in Manasquan High School. I come to every football game. I was captain of the football team when I was here, and anytime I can help Manasquan High School, I want to congratulate our football team. Take this opportunity. They did a great job.
Well, thank you a lot for coming down, and this is John DeRosa from MHS TV signing off. Have a good day. Historical events are easy to remember on anniversaries and such, but Pearl Harbor is a day that should be remembered always. I think what was interesting talking to Mr. Schafer, he reminded us that a lot of these kids that served over in Pearl Harbor were not much older than you and I. He himself was 24, and I'm sure that there were kids that were younger than him there. And this wasn't long ago. Thousands and thousands of children, of kids our age, were killed, and this was, 50 years ago. So we're going to close up with some actual footage from Pearl Harbor and footage following Pearl Harbor. And I ask that you take this day to remember those that served and remember them always.